So you want to own a diamond mine, a private security convoy escorting a single briefcase, an armored vault stacked with stones worth more than the trucks that carried them, your name on a mining license in a country most people couldn't find on a map, a rock so rare it gets its own bulletproof glass and its own bodyguard. Here's what the brochure doesn't show you: a crusher the size of an apartment building, running 24 hours a day, grinding up 1 million tons of ordinary rock just to find a few hundred kilograms of anything worth keeping. And this week, an entire diamond mine that had been running for almost 3 decades ran out of a cache so completely that not one single buyer on Earth would take it. Not at a discount, not for free. That mine is called Ekati in Canada's Northwest Territories. It was the first diamond mine this country ever built back in 1998. It was supposed to keep running until 2029. Instead, this week, a court placed it into receivership after an 8-week search turned up 0 offers from 140 potential buyers who were contacted. A business that digs the most expensive rocks on the planet out of the frozen ground still ran out of money. Diamond mining looks like the closest thing left to a monopoly on desire itself. It used to be exactly that. Then, within the space of about 3 years, 2 things that had propped each other up for nearly a century came apart at the same time. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what it costs to actually own one of these operations, why the single most powerful company in the history of the diamond trade is being sold off in pieces this year, and why the same rock mined from the same ground can be either one of the best trades in modern mining or a bankruptcy filing, depending entirely on which kind of diamond it turns out to be. First, understand what a diamond mine actually is. Underneath the romance, it starts roughly 150 kilometers below the Earth's surface, where carbon gets crushed under enough heat and pressure to rearrange itself into the hardest natural material known to exist. Every so often, a violent volcanic eruption millions of years ago punches a narrow pipe of magma straight up through the crust, dragging those diamonds along for the ride and freezing them inside a carrot-shaped column of blue-gray rock called kimberlite. Most kimberlite pipes are geological duds, carrying nothing worth mining. A tiny fraction of them, scattered across a handful of ancient, stable continental cores in southern Africa, Siberia, and northern Canada, actually carry diamonds in commercial quantities. Find one of those, and you've found what's called a primary deposit. Diamonds also erode out of kimberlite pipes over millions of years and travel down rivers, out to sea, or across deserts, which is how you get the alluvial and marine deposits that built the diamond industries of places like Namibia and Sierra Leone. Primary kimberlite and secondary alluvial deposits are, in practice, 2 different businesses wearing the same gemstone. By value, the diamond world is dominated by a small handful of names. De Beers, majority owned by Anglo-American, operating through Botswana, its 50-50 partnership with the government of Botswana. Alrosa, Russia's state-controlled giant, responsible for something like a quarter to a third of the world's rough diamond supply by volume. Rio Tinto, which used to run Argyle in Australia and still runs Diavik in Canada, and a long tail of independent producers like Petra Diamonds, Lucara, and Burgundy Diamond Mines, operating mines the majors either built decades ago or walked away from. Owning a diamond mine in practice means picking a seat at one of these very different tables, because a government joint venture in Botswana and a debt-funded junior miner in the Arctic are playing completely different games with completely different rules. So, what does it actually cost to build one of these from nothing? Gacho Quay, the last major new diamond mine built anywhere in the world, cost roughly $1 billion to construct before a single diamond was ever sold. It sits in the Arctic, so before De Beers and Mountain Province could even start digging, they had to build the roads, the power supply, and the camps from scratch. Smaller greenfield projects still run into the hundreds of millions. One undeveloped Canadian project, Chidliak, was estimated at $455 million just to reach production on a 13-year mine life. And that's assuming you already know exactly where to dig. The overwhelming majority of kimberlite pipes ever discovered turn out to hold nothing worth mining at all, which means most of the exploration money spent chasing the next Zhuaning simply disappears into the ground. Here's the single number that decides whether any of this makes money: the strip ratio. A diamond deposit isn't a seam you can follow. It's a needle sprinkled through a haystack the size of a small mountain. To reach the ore, you first have to remove the waste rock sitting on top of it and around it. And the strip ratio is simply how many tons of that waste you move for every single ton of actual diamond-bearing rock. A ratio of 3 to 1 is very manageable. Past 6 or 7 to 1, the economics get uncomfortable fast. Above 10 to 1, almost nothing on Earth is valuable enough per ton to justify it, except sometimes diamonds and high-grade gold. Run the actual math, and you start to see why this business is so unforgiving. At Petra Diamond's Cullinan mine, a ton of ore is worth around $53 and costs about $16 to mine and process. At Finch, ore worth around $61 a ton costs about $28 to extract. Those are healthy margins on paper, single-digit dollars, but multiply by millions of tons a year. And that thin per-ton spread is the entire business. Push the strip ratio up as a pit gets deeper, and that same math can flip from comfortable to underwater with almost no warning. It's exactly why the biggest mines eventually go underground instead of digging an ever-widening crater. De Beers spent over $2 billion converting its Venetia mine in South Africa from an open pit to an underground operation, purely to keep the strip ratio math alive through 2045. Then there's grade. How many carats of actual diamond sit inside every ton of that ore? At most commercial diamond mines, that number is astonishingly small, often a fraction of a single carat for every ton of rock processed, even at some of the best mines on Earth, which means, at scale, a diamond mine isn't really in the business of finding diamonds. It's in the business of moving mountains of ordinary rock to find the sliver in 10,000 that's actually worth anything. Jwaneng in Botswana, the single richest diamond mine in the world by value, processes millions of tons of ore every year, alongside tens of millions more tons of pure waste rock, just to keep production flowing. It's nicknamed the Prince of Mines, and it alone generates something like 60 to 70% of the entire revenue of Botswana, the joint venture that runs Botswana's diamond mines. Now, here's the part almost nobody outside the trade understands. Once you've actually dug the diamonds up, you don't just sell them on an open market. For most of the last century, one company controlled how the world's entire supply reached buyers. In 1934, De Beers chairman Ernest Oppenheimer built a system called the Sight. About 10 times a year, De Beers invites a hand-picked list of buyers, called Sightholders, to inspect a pre-packed box of rough diamonds. There's no negotiation. You don't get to pick individual stones. You take the box at the price you're given in full, in cash, or you don't get invited back. That system is still running today, nearly a century later, and it still moves around 90% of De Beers' rough diamonds by value. It's tightening, not loosening. In 2026, De Beers cut its list of approved Sightholders from around 69 down to 45 and set a new minimum. Buyers now need to purchase at least $15 million a year just to keep their seat at the table. Controlling exactly how much rough hits the market and who's allowed to buy it was never an accident. It's the actual mechanism that decided how much a diamond was worth for most of the 20th century, long before anyone got to the grading report, which raises the real question underneath all of this. If the price was never simply supply and demand meeting in an open market, what was it actually built on? During the Great Depression in 1938, U.S. diamond sales were badly stalling. De Beers hired an American advertising agency, N.W. Ayer, with one job: make an engagement without a diamond feel incomplete. In 1947, a copywriter named Frances Garrity handed her bosses 4 words she almost didn't submit: "A diamond is forever." It became one of the most effective advertising slogans of the entire 20th century. In 1940, before the campaign took hold, roughly 10% of first-time American brides received a diamond engagement ring. By 1990, that number was 80%. De Beers' annual U.S. wholesale sales climbed from $23 million in 1939 to over $2 billion by 1979. That's the part the romance never tells you. A diamond mine was never purely in the business of extracting a rare rock. It was in the business of manufacturing a belief and then mining just carefully enough to keep that belief intact. As long as supply stayed tightly controlled and nobody could get an identical stone any other way, that belief was worth an enormous amount of money. For close to 90 years, both of those conditions held at once: real scarcity and a story convincing enough that nobody questioned the price. Starting around 2020, both of them broke within a few years of each other for completely different reasons. One of them is a technology. The other is geology finally running its course. The technology is the lab-grown diamond, and its price collapse has been one of the fastest of any consumer good in modern history. A 1-carat lab-grown diamond that retailed for around $3,400 in early 2020 sells for well under $1,000 today. That's a fall of somewhere between 70 and nearly 90%, depending on the source and the exact cut, in roughly 6 years. Manufacturing capacity for lab-grown stones grew by around 300% between 2020 and 2023 alone, mostly out of India and China. A lab-grown stone is chemically identical to a mined one. Same carbon, same crystal structure, same sparkle under a jeweler's loupe. The only meaningful difference left is where it came from, and where it came from turns out to matter a lot less to most shoppers than the diamond industry spent 90 years hoping it would. Natural diamond prices didn't crash the same way. They eroded. Overall, natural diamond prices are down somewhere around 25 to 30% from their 2022 peak. That erosion isn't evenly spread. Small, commercial-grade stones, the bread and butter carats that make up the bulk of most mines' production, got hit hardest because that's exactly the size and quality where lab-grown competes most directly. Larger stones, rarer colors, and investment-grade quality have held up far better, in some categories even climbing, which means the word diamond now describes two increasingly separate markets with two completely different price stories, and which side of that split your particular mine happens to produce now decides almost everything about whether you're profitable. Nobody has felt that split harder than De Beers itself. Between 2022 and 2025, the company's annual revenue fell from around $6.6 billion to $3.5 billion. Production over the same stretch dropped from 35 million carats a year to under 22 million. Anglo American has now written down the value of its diamond business 3 years running: $1.6 billion in 2023, $2.9 billion in 2024, another $2.3 billion in 2025. That's close to $7 billion in impairments in 3 years on a company that once effectively was the diamond industry. In 2025 alone, De Beers posted an underlying operating loss of over $500 million, compared with a loss of just $25 million the year before. So Anglo American is doing something that would have been unthinkable a decade ago, selling De Beers entirely to focus on copper and other metals instead. The sale process has dragged on since 2024, through multiple rounds of bidders. Botswana and Angola have both expressed interest in acquiring meaningful stakes themselves, which would be a stunning reversal. The countries that once just supplied the rock to a London-headquartered company, potentially ending up owning the company outright. As of this week, Anglo has named a preferred bidder, a group called the Global Diamond Consortium, led by Gareth Penny, De Beers' own former chief executive. Nothing is signed yet, but for the first time in nearly a century, the question of who actually owns the world's most famous diamond company is genuinely up for grabs. Zoom out from the company, and the country most tied to that outcome is Botswana. Diamonds account for around 80% of everything Botswana exports, and by IMF estimates, roughly a quarter of its entire GDP. When the diamond market cratered, so did the country. Botswana's economy contracted for 2 straight years, its deepest recession since independence in 1966, and government revenue tied to diamonds fell from around $7 billion a year at its peak to about $4.2 billion. This is what it actually looks like when a nation effectively co-owns a mine. The mine's balance sheet and the country's budget become the same document. In October 2024, that pressure showed up at the ballot box. Botswana's ruling party, in power for 58 consecutive years since independence, lost the national election, largely over the economic pain of the diamond downturn. The incoming government immediately pushed De Beers for a bigger share of the mines the two of them jointly own. They got it. Under a new 10-year agreement, Botswana's share of Botswana's diamond sales rises from 25% to 30 to 40, with an option to reach a full 50-50 split if both sides extend the deal. In exchange, De Beers secured its mining licenses in Botswana, clear through 2054. That single renegotiation is worth, over its lifetime, vastly more than most entire mining companies. Meanwhile, in the Canadian Arctic, the picture is closer to outright collapse. Diavik, run by Rio Tinto for a quarter of a century, ceased operations this year after reporting a loss of over $100 million in 2024 alone. Gachokwe, that billion-dollar mine from earlier, paused its own expansion project this year and opened workforce reduction talks. And Ekati, the mine we opened this video with, is expected to physically stop production by mid-August after nearly 3 decades of running. All three of Canada's major diamond mines, run by three completely different companies, are in some form of trouble at exactly the same time. That's not one company making a mistake. That's an entire regional industry running out of runway together. It's not just the Arctic. Independent miners running older. De Beers' legacy assets are being squeezed just as hard. Petra Diamonds owns Cullinan and Finch in South Africa, two mines with over a century of combined operating history between them. In the first half of this fiscal year, Petra posted a loss of $188 million, and its net debt climbed to $284 million. Realized prices at Finch fell to around $47 a carat, down from $56 just 2 quarters earlier, because Finch mostly produces exactly the small, commercial-grade stones getting hit hardest by lab-grown competition. In 2026, Finch was placed into what South African law calls business rescue, a formal, court-supervised process for a company that can't currently pay its bills but isn't dead yet. A mine can have generations of production history run by seasoned professionals, sitting on real physical diamonds, and still end up there. None of this means every diamond mine is a losing bet right now. It means the industry has split cleanly in two, and one half of it is quietly becoming more valuable, not less. When Rio Tinto's Argyle mine in Australia closed in 2020, it took roughly 90% of the world's supply of natural pink diamonds off the market with it, permanently. Argyle pink diamond values had already climbed more than 500% over the prior 20 years. Losing the source entirely only tightened that further. Large stones, fancy colors, and investment-grade quality are the one part of this business where scarcity is still completely real and getting more real every year, not manufactured by an ad agency. According to Alrosa, 5-carat stones climbed over 8% in a single quarter in early 2026, even while smaller stones kept sliding. There's a second kind of scarcity building too, and none of it has anything to do with marketing. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the G7 has coordinated sanctions on Alrosa, Russia's state diamond giant, which alone accounts for something like a quarter to a third of the world's entire rough diamond supply by volume. Those sanctions have already pushed a meaningful share of Russian rough out of the world's biggest buying markets, rerouting it through places like Dubai instead. On top of that, several of the world's other major diamond mines, across Canada and southern Africa, are scheduled to close or scale back by 2027. Angola's Luele mine, opened in 2013, is the only genuinely major new diamond deposit discovered anywhere on Earth in the last 20 years. Which means, underneath the current crisis, actual physical diamond supply reaching the open market is on track to tighten hard, right as buyers finally work out which stones they still want at full price. That's the bet still sitting quietly underneath Jwaneng. Botswana is spending over $2 billion, sending that mine underground, extending its life past 2050, more than a century after it was first found. Nobody spends $2 billion extending a 100-year-old hole in the ground, unless they still believe in exactly one half of the old story. So let's build the two futures the way we always do on this channel. The optimistic version. You hold a stake in a mine like Jwaneng, high-grade, majority government-backed, producing a meaningful share of large stones and fancy colors alongside the ordinary run-of-mine carats. Your strip ratio is manageable enough that going underground still pencils out for decades, as smaller, commercial-grade competitors keep closing across Canada and South Africa. Physical supply of your specific category of stone keeps tightening. Sightholders and cutting houses, desperate for guaranteed long-term access to real supply, pay a premium just to keep their allocation. Your government partner has every incentive to keep the mine running well and the licenses renewed, because their national budget depends on it as much as yours does. In that version, you're not really running a mining company anymore. You're holding a permanently scarce claim on one of the only categories of stone that lab-grown technology still can't replicate the story of, even though it can replicate the chemistry. As the weaker half of the industry closes down around you, your remaining output becomes worth more simply by comparison, the same way a handful of surviving farms in a drought-hit region can end up earning more per acre than they did when every farm was thriving. You didn't get richer by finding more diamonds. You got richer because almost everyone else stopped finding theirs. Now, the harder version. You own or operate a mid-tier mine, one whose production skews towards smaller, commercial-grade stones, the exact category collapsing fastest against lab-grown competition. Your strip ratio was fine when the mine was young and shallow. 10 years in, the pit is deeper, waste tonnage is climbing, and your cost per carat is rising exactly as your realized price per carat is falling. A currency move against you, a strong local currency, the same kind that hurt Petra diamonds in South Africa, quietly erases whatever margin was left. You go to your lenders for a refinancing. They ask reasonably whether your bread and butter product still has a viable long-term buyer at all. If the answer is no or even just uncertain, capital stops showing up, exactly like it stopped showing up for Ekati. Production halts. A court appoints a receiver. And here's the part almost nobody budgets for at the start. Even after the mine stops making money, the closure and environmental reclamation obligations don't disappear. Someone still has to fill in the pit, treat the water, and monitor the site, sometimes for decades after the last truck leaves. And if the company can't pay for it, that bill quietly gets handed to the government, the receiver, or whoever's left holding the license. The romance of owning a diamond mine never mentions that the hole in the ground is a liability on a clock, long after it stops being an asset. Strip away the vault and the bodyguards, and here's what a diamond mine actually is. It's a 100-year bet that two separate things stay true at the same time, that the ground still holds enough of the rarest carbon on Earth worth digging for, and that people still believe that carbon is worth more than the price of an identical, factory-grown one sitting right next to it. For nearly 90 years, those two bets moved together so closely that almost nobody had to think of them as separate at all. In 2026, for the first time, they've come apart. The rocks are getting genuinely harder to find, and the belief is getting cheaper to manufacture in a lab in Surat or Shenzhen in exactly the same handful of years. Every diamond mine on Earth right now, from a court receiver in Yellowknife to a consortium walking into De Beers headquarters, is really just placing a bet on which one of those two forces wins first.